The arrow had gone clean through her shoulder, and Callum Preston knew from the angle and the fletching that it belonged to his own regiment. He had been tracking the orc raider for 3 days through the pine forests that bordered the Northern Territories, following orders from Captain Harwell to bring back proof of death. And instead, he found her collapsed against a moss-covered boulder, her green skin pale with blood loss, her breathing shallow and labored. She opened her eyes as he approached, and he saw no rage there, no killing fury. Only pain and a weary resignation that made something twist in his chest. Her hand moved weakly toward the crude axe at her belt, but she lacked the strength to draw it. Blood soaked the leather wrappings around her torso, and more of it pooled beneath her in the fallen leaves. "Go ahead," she said in surprisingly clear common tongue, her tusked mouth forming the words with effort. "Finish it." Callum stood there with his bow in hand, an arrow already nocked, and realized he could not do it. This was not battle. This was not even justice. This was just a wounded woman waiting to die alone in the forest, and every instinct he possessed rebelled against adding to her suffering. "That arrow needs to come out," he heard himself say. Her eyes widened slightly, showing flecks of amber in the brown. "You are human." "I am." He lowered his bow and unslung his pack. "And you are bleeding to death. We can discuss the politics of it after I stop you from dying." She tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough that made her wince. "Your people shot me. Why would you help?" "Because leaving you here to die slowly is not something I can do." He knelt beside her, examining the wound. The arrow had punched through the meat of her shoulder, missing anything vital but causing significant damage. "This is going to hurt." "Everything already hurts." He almost smiled at that. "Fair point." He pulled out his knife and she tensed. "I need to cut away the leather so I can see what I'm working with, that is all." She studied his face for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Her skin felt feverish under his hands as he carefully cut away the blood-soaked wrappings. Up close, he could see the fine scars that marked her arms and shoulders, the evidence of a hard life. She was younger than he had first thought, probably close to his own 24 years. "What is your name?" he asked as he worked, trying to distract her from the pain. "Grukka." The word came out strained. "Of the Stone Fang clan. Or I was before they cast me out." "Why did they cast you out?" She was silent for a moment. "I refused to raid a human farmstead. There were children there. I said we should find food elsewhere, and my father said I had gone soft." Her jaw clenched. "So he cast me out, and I have been alone for 2 seasons." Callum paused in his work, processing this. The reports had spoken of orc raiders burning farms, but they had not mentioned internal conflicts within the clans. "The arrow has to come out. I can push it through or pull it back, but either way, it will hurt more than anything you have felt today." "Then do it quickly." He respected that. No pleading, no false bravery, just acceptance of necessity. He positioned himself, gripped the arrow shaft firmly, and pushed it through in one smooth motion. Grukka made a sound that was half gasp, half growl, her body going rigid with pain, but she did not scream. He snapped the head off and pulled the shaft back through, then immediately pressed clean cloth against both wounds. "Keep pressure here," he instructed, guiding her good hand to the cloth. Her fingers were shaking. "I need to make a fire and heat my knife to cauterize it, or infection will kill you as surely as the arrow." "You're very calm about this," she managed through gritted teeth. "I was a field surgeon's assistant before I became a scout." He gathered deadwood quickly, building a small fire in the shelter of the boulder. "I have done this more times than I care to remember." As the flames grew, he watched her face. She was trying very hard not to show weakness, her eyes fixed on the canopy above, her breathing carefully controlled. Pride, he realized. Even cast out and wounded, she held on to her pride. "This part will be worse," he warned as he held his knife in the flames. "I know what cauterization is." Her voice was tight. "My clan had warriors. I know field medicine." "Then you know to bite down on this." He offered her a strip of leather from his pack. She took it without comment, placing it between her teeth. When the knife was ready, he did the front wound first, pressing the hot metal to the torn flesh. The smell was awful, and Grukka's entire body went taut, her fingers digging into the earth, but the leather muffled any sound she might have made. He worked quickly, then repeated the process on the exit wound. When it was done, she spat out the leather and lay there panting, sweat beading on her forehead. "I think," she said slowly, that I owe you my life. You do not owe me anything. He was already preparing bandages, tearing strips from his spare shirt. Can you sit up? With his help, she managed to rise enough for him to wrap the wounds properly. Her skin was hot under his hands, and he worried about fever, but the bleeding had stopped. That was something. You tracked me, she said as he worked. I heard you following for the past day, and I thought I could lose you in the rocky ground. But then I stumbled, and your people were there with bows. She paused. They did not even give me a chance to surrender. They just shot. They are afraid. Raids have been increasing, and fear makes people cruel. Are you afraid of me? He tied off the bandage and sat back, meeting her eyes. Right now? No. You can barely stand. If you were healthy and armed, would I be afraid? Probably. But that is just sense, not hatred. Honest, she almost smiled. I did not know humans could be honest. I did not know orcs could refuse to harm children. He began packing his supplies away. It seems we both have things to learn. She watched him with an expression he could not quite read. What happens now? Do you take me to your people? If I did, they would hang you. Or worse. The truth sat bitter on his tongue. The captain is not interested in prisoners or mercy. He wants to make examples. So you will let me go? Callum looked at her, really looked at her. She was weak, feverish, and alone in hostile territory. She would not last 2 days on her own, and they both knew it. No. I'm going to take you somewhere safe, and I'm going to make sure you heal. After that, you can decide what you want to do. Why? The question was almost a whisper. Why would you do that? He had asked himself the same thing in the moments after he decided not to kill her. The answer was complex, woven from threads of conscience and compassion and a deep weariness with violence. But he settled for a simpler truth. Because I am tired of death, because you deserve a chance, because it is the right thing to do. Grukka closed her eyes, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. I do not understand you, Callum Preston. You know my name? You said it in your sleep last night. I was close enough to hear. You have nightmares. Everyone who has seen war has nightmares. He stood and looked around, assessing their situation. There is a trapper's cabin about half a day's walk from here. It should be abandoned this time of year. Can you walk? I can try. It was slow going. Grukka was strong, stronger than any human woman he had known, but the wound and blood loss had taken their toll. She leaned heavily on him, her arm across his shoulders, and he bore her weight as they made their way through the forest. She never complained, even when he felt her trembling with effort, even when they had to stop so she could rest. The sun was setting when they finally reached the cabin, a small structure of weathered logs tucked into a clearing. Callum helped Grukka inside and settled her on the single cot, then set about making the place livable. There was old firewood stacked against the wall, and he soon had a fire going in the stone hearth. He found a cache of dried venison and hardtack, supplies left for emergencies, and set water to boil. You should go back, Grukka said from the cot. Your people will wonder where you are. I am a scout. They expect me to be gone for days, sometimes weeks. He added herbs to the water, making a tea that would help with pain and fever. We have time. Time for what? For you to heal. For me to figure out what to tell them. He brought her the tea. Drink this. She took the cup, her hands steadier now, and sipped cautiously. It is bitter. Medicine usually is. She drank it anyway, then lay back with a sigh. In the firelight, her features softened, and he could see past the otherness to the person beneath. Her eyes were intelligent, her face marked by both strength and vulnerability. She was beautiful, he realized with a start, in a way that had nothing to do with human standards and everything to do with the life and spirit that animated her. You are staring, she observed. Sorry, I was just thinking. About what? About how wrong we have been. About each other, I mean. Humans and orcs. He sat down on the floor near the fire. We are taught that your people are monsters, incapable of mercy or honor. But you refuse to raid a farm because of children. That is not monstrous. That is decent. And I was taught that humans are weak, treacherous, and cruel. But you saved me when you could have killed me or left me to die. That is not weakness or treachery. She shifted on the cot, wincing slightly. Maybe we are both wrong about many things. They fell into silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the forest was alive with night sounds, the call of owls and the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Callum found himself thinking about the path that had brought him here, the choices that had seemed so clear before and now felt muddied and uncertain. "Tell me about the nightmares," Grukka said quietly. He glanced at her, surprised. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I have them too, because maybe it helps to speak of such things." So he told her about the battles he had seen, the friends he had lost, the faces that haunted him in the dark hours before dawn, about the farmer's boy who had become a soldier out of necessity, who had learned to track and to fight and to survive, but who had never learned how to forget. She listened without interruption, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and when he finished, she nodded slowly. "We are more alike than different," she said. "I have seen battle too, lost people I cared for. The first time I killed, I was 16, and it was a human soldier who tried to kill my younger brother. I did what I had to do, but I remember his face. I remember all their faces. Do you regret it?" "I regret that it was necessary, but I do not regret saving my brother." She paused. "He died anyway, 2 years later, in a raid, a human arrow, much like the one that hit me. So perhaps it was all for nothing." The sorrow in her voice was so raw that Callum found himself moving closer, reaching out to touch her hand. Her skin was still too warm, but the fever had not worsened. "It was not for nothing. You gave him 2 more years, 2 years of life and laughter and being loved. That matters." She looked down at their hands, hers so much larger than his, her fingers calloused and scarred. "You are a strange man, Callum Preston." "So I have been told." She smiled then, a real smile that showed her tusks and made her eyes crinkle at the corners, and something in his chest tightened. He pulled his hand back, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment, the danger in it. She was not human. She was supposed to be his enemy. He was supposed to be tracking her, not tending her wounds and sharing stories by firelight. But he could not bring himself to regret any of it. The next few days fell into a routine. Callum hunted and foraged, bringing back game and edible plants. He changed Grukka's bandages twice daily, watching for signs of infection. She slept often, her body demanding rest as it healed. But when she was awake, they talked. About their lives, their families, their hopes for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. He learned that she loved stories, that she had once dreamed of being a lorekeeper for her clan before the raids and violence had consumed everything. She learned that he had wanted to be a carpenter, building things instead of destroying them, but the war had taken that choice away. They discovered a shared love of the forest, of the quiet moments at dawn when the world was still and peaceful. On the 4th day, Grukka managed to stand without assistance, and the relief Callum felt was profound. The wound was healing cleanly, the fever had broken, and color had returned to her green skin. She was going to be all right. I should move on," she said that evening as they ate roasted rabbit. "You have done more than enough, stayed longer than you should have. Where will you go?" "South, perhaps, away from clan territories and human settlements both. Find somewhere quiet to live." She did not sound enthusiastic about the prospect. "Alone? I have been alone before." "That does not mean you should be." The words came out before he could stop them, and he saw her look at him sharply. "What are you saying?" He did not know, not exactly. He only knew that the thought of her leaving, of never seeing her again, filled him with a sense of loss he had no right to feel. "I am saying that maybe there is another option. Maybe you do not have to be alone." "Callum," her voice was careful. "What we are doing here, this kindness between us, it cannot last. You know that. The world will not allow it." "Then perhaps the world is wrong." She set down her food, her expression troubled. "You are talking about something dangerous, something that could get us both killed." "I know." He met her eyes across the fire. "But I also know that I have felt more alive, more like myself, in these past few days than I have in years. And I think maybe you feel something similar." The silence stretched between them, taut with possibility and fear. Finally, Grukka spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me, human? I want to know if what I am feeling is madness or truth. I want to know if you feel it too, this pull between us. He stood, moving around the fire to crouch beside her. I want to know your answer before you walk away. She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek with unexpected gentleness. You are mad, but yes, I feel it. I've tried not to. I've told myself it is gratitude, nothing more. But that is a lie. Her hand fell away. But feeling something and acting on it are different things. You have a life to return to. I am an exile with no home and no future. Then make a future. With me. You do not know what you are asking. Your people would see you as a traitor. Mine would see me as worse. She shook her head. We cannot build anything on such a foundation. Then we build somewhere else, somewhere far from both our peoples, where we answer only to ourselves. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I'm not saying it would be easy, but I'm saying it might be possible. She studied their joined hands, her expression conflicted. I swore I would never need anyone again. Needing people, caring for them, it only brings pain. Living alone brings a different kind of pain, a slower, colder kind. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm just asking you not to leave yet. Give us, a chance to see what it might become. Grukka looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the war playing out behind her eyes. Fear and hope, caution and longing, all tangled together. Finally, she nodded. 1 more week, that is all I can promise. 1 week, he agreed, and felt something warm and bright kindle in his chest. The next morning, Callum woke to find her already up, moving through a series of stretches and exercises to test her healing shoulder. She moved with a warrior's grace, her body powerful and controlled, and he found himself watching with undisguised admiration. When she noticed, she paused. I need to regain my strength, she explained. If I am staying, I should not be useless. You could never be useless. He stood and began his own morning routine, checking his weapons and supplies. But I understand the need to feel capable. They worked side by side, comfortable in the quiet, and Callum marveled at how natural it felt. There was none of the awkwardness he might have expected, no sense of wrongness, just 2 people existing in the same space, finding a rhythm together. Later, they walked the forest together, Grukka moving slowly but steadily. She pointed out plants he did not recognize, explaining their uses in Orcish medicine and cooking. He showed her how to read the subtle signs that indicated game trails and water sources. They were teaching each other, he realized, bridging the gap between their peoples one small piece of knowledge at a time. Your tracking skills are impressive, she commented as they examined the prints of a deer, better than most orc hunters I knew. I had a good teacher. Old Marcus, the regiment's chief scout. He taught me that tracking is not just about following prints. It is about understanding the animal, thinking like it does. He straightened. Of course, he also taught me to track orcs, which feels somewhat awkward now. She laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. I suppose it does. Though to be fair, I was taught to track humans, so we are even. They continued walking, and the conversation drifted to lighter topics. She told him stories of her childhood, of growing up in the clan, of festivals and hunts and the complex politics of orcish society. He shared memories of his village, of harvest celebrations and winter storytelling nights, of the simple joys of a life before war. Do you miss it? She asked. Your village? Sometimes. But it is not really there anymore, not the way I remember it. Too many people dead, too much changed. He picked up a smooth stone from the creek they were following, turning it over in his hands. What I miss most is the feeling of belonging somewhere, of having a place in the world. I understand that. Being cast out, it is like losing a limb. You still feel it sometimes, reach for it without thinking, and then remember it is gone. She looked at him, her expression serious. But perhaps belonging is not about a place. Perhaps it is about people. Is that what you think we are doing? Finding a place to belong with each other? Maybe. Or maybe we are just 2 lost souls taking comfort where we can find it. But she said it with a softness that suggested she did not really believe that she was as caught up in this as he was. They returned to the cabin as the sun began to set, and Callum prepared dinner while Grukka tended the fire. It was domestic, almost mundane, and yet it felt significant. like they were practicing for something, rehearsing a future that might never come. That night, as they sat by the fire, Grukka asked him about his scars. He showed her the marks on his arms and torso, each one with a story. A blade cut from a skirmish near the eastern pass, an arrow grazed from an ambush, a burn from a fire that had consumed a supply wagon. She listened to each tale, and when he finished, she showed him hers in return. This one, she traced a long scar across her ribs, was from a border clash when I was 18. I was arrogant, thought I was invincible. A human soldier with a spear taught me otherwise. You were lucky. I was, and this one, she indicated a jagged mark on her forearm, was from a bear. I was hunting alone, stupidly, and did not realize she had cubs nearby. She was just protecting them, and I was in her territory. I learned to be more careful after that. Callum reached out, his fingers hovering just above the scar. May I? She nodded, and he traced the line of raised skin, feeling the warmth of her beneath his fingertips. Her breath caught slightly, and he looked up to find her watching him with an intensity that made his heart race. Callum, she said softly. Yes? This thing between us, it frightens me. It frightens me too. He did not pull his hand away, but not as much as the thought of not exploring it frightens me. She covered his hand with hers, holding it against her arm. I have never felt this way before, not about anyone, human or orc. I do not know what to do with these feelings. Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out together. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and for a moment he thought she might kiss him, but instead she rested her forehead against his, a gesture that felt even more intimate than a kiss might have been. They stayed like that, breathing the same air, existing in the same small space, and Callum felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness, of this being exactly where he was meant to be. 1 week, she whispered. 1 week, he agreed. The days that followed were some of the best Callum could remember. They fell into an easy partnership, dividing tasks without discussion, moving around each other with increasing familiarity. Grukka's strength returned steadily, and with it came a playfulness he had not expected. She teased him about his cooking, challenged him to contests of skill, made him laugh in ways he had forgotten he could. He found himself noticing small things about her, the way she hummed tunelessly while working, the careful way she handled his belongings, conscious of her greater strength, the soft expression she wore when she thought he was not looking. Each observation added another layer to his growing feelings, building something substantial and undeniable. On the 6th day, they went hunting together. Grukka had fashioned herself a crude bow from materials in the forest, and she moved through the trees with a silence that impressed him. They worked as a team, driving a young buck toward each other, and when it fell, it was impossible to say whose arrow had been the killing shot. We work well together, she said as they field-dressed the animal. We do. He looked at her, at the way the dappled sunlight caught in her dark hair, at the satisfied smile on her face. Grukka, tomorrow's the last day of the week. Her smile faded. I know. Have you thought about what happens after? I have thought about little else. She set down her knife and turned to face him fully. I want to stay, Callum. But I need to know that you have truly considered what that means, not just the romance of it, the novelty, but the reality. We would have to leave everything behind, build a life in hiding, always watching for danger. Your dreams of carpentry, of a normal life, they would be gone. They were already gone. The war took them long before I met you. He moved closer. What I have found with you, this connection, it is more real than any dream I used to have, more important. And if you come to regret that choice, if the isolation and hardship wear away at these feelings, then we will face that together, just as we would face anything else. He took her hands in his. I cannot promise that everything will be perfect. I can only promise that I will try every day to be worthy of this chance to make you happy. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. I have been alone for so long. I had accepted that as my fate, and now you offer me something I never thought possible, and I am terrified of wanting it too much. Want it. Want this. Want us. He pulled her closer, and she came willingly, her arms wrapping around him. She was taller than him, broader, and yet she fit against him perfectly. "Stay with me, Grukka. Not for a week, not for a season, but for as long as you will have me." "Forever," she whispered against his hair. "I want forever." He pulled back just enough to see her face, and what he saw there took his breath away. Love, raw and new and achingly vulnerable. He reached up, cupping her face in his hands, and kissed her. Her lips were warm, her tusks cool against his skin, and the sensation was strange and wonderful and absolutely right. She made a soft sound, her hands tightening on his back, and the kiss deepened. There was hunger in it, but also tenderness, a mutual claiming that spoke of promises and hopes and the scary, exhilarating step they were taking together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Callum felt like he had crossed some invisible threshold from which there was no return. "Well," Grukka said, her voice shaky, "I suppose that settles that." He laughed, the sound bubbling up from some deep well of joy. "I suppose it does." They finished dressing the deer in a state of giddy happiness, stealing glances and accidental touches, acting like young lovers everywhere, regardless of species. The walk back to the cabin took twice as long as it should have because they kept stopping to kiss, to hold each other, to marvel at this new reality they were creating. That night, they made plans. They would need to travel far, to lands beyond the war zones where no one knew their faces. They would need new names, a cover story, a way to explain a human and an orc living together. It would not be easy, but as they talked, the possibilities began to take shape. A remote homestead, self-sufficient and far from prying eyes, a life built on their own terms. "We should leave soon," Grukka said, "before your people come looking for you." "Agreed. Tomorrow we gather supplies and prepare. The day after we start our journey." He pulled her closer, savoring the warmth of her beside him. "Are you certain about this? Truly certain?" "More certain than I have been about anything in my life." She kissed the top of his head. "You saved me, Callum Preston, in more ways than one. Now let me save you in return. Let me give you a reason to leave the war behind." "You already have." They made love that night, a slow and tender exploration of each other. There was awkwardness, as there always is when two people come together for the first time, but there was also laughter and patience and a deep sense of connection. Callum marveled at her strength, at the way she was so careful with him even in the heights of passion, and Grukka found herself undone by his gentleness, by the way he touched her like she was precious rather than monstrous. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow cot, skin against skin, and Callum felt a peace he had never known. This was right. This was real. Everything else, all the complications and dangers ahead, they would face together. The next day was a flurry of activity. They gathered everything useful from the cabin, packed their supplies, and destroyed any evidence of their stay. Callum left a few coins as payment for what they had taken, a small gesture toward easing his conscience. As the sun set on that final evening in the cabin, they stood together in the doorway, looking out at the forest that had sheltered their beginning. "No regrets?" Grukka asked. "None. You?" "None." She took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," he agreed. They set out at dawn, heading south and west away from everything familiar. The travel was hard, the country rough, but they made steady progress. Callum taught Grukka more of the common tongue, smoothing out her accent, and she taught him some words of Orcish. They practiced their story until it came naturally. He was a veteran, she a half-orc who had been rescued from slavers. It was close enough to the truth that it would not trip them up. 3 weeks into their journey, they encountered their first real test, a small village that they needed to pass through to reach the mountains beyond. Grukka pulled her hood low, trying to hide her features, and Callum kept a protective hand on her back as they entered the market square. They drew stares, but not the hostile kind Callum had feared. Mostly curiosity and a few nods of acknowledgement. It seemed that here, far from the front lines of the war, a mixed couple was unusual but not unheard of. They bought supplies and moved on without incident. "That went better than expected," Grukka said once they were back on the road. "It did. Maybe the world is more ready for us than we thought. Or maybe we just got lucky." But she was smiling as she said it. They continued south, following old trade roads and game trails, always moving toward the frontier lands where civilization thinned and gave way to wilderness. Along the way, they encountered other travelers, a merchant who warned them about bandits in the hills, a wandering priest who blessed their union without question, a family of settlers who shared their fire and asked no difficult questions. Each encounter bolstered Callum's hope that they could make this work, that there was a place in the world for what they were building together. But he never let his guard down completely, always aware that danger could come from any direction. 2 months after leaving the cabin, they found their destination. A valley tucked into the foothills of the southern mountains, green and fertile and utterly remote. A small stream ran through it, and there was good timber for building. It was perfect. "This is it," Grukka said, surveying the land with an appraising eye. "This is where we start." "Our home," Callum agreed, feeling the weight of the word, the promise in it. They set to work immediately. Callum's carpentry skills, rusty from disuse, came back as he began felling trees and shaping timber. Grukka used her strength to haul logs and stone, and her clever hands proved adept at thatching and weaving. They worked from dawn to dusk, and the cabin slowly took shape. It was hard work, exhausting work, but there was joy in it, in creating something together, in building a physical manifestation of their commitment to each other. When the walls were up and the roof was sound, they stood back and looked at what they had made, and Callum felt a swell of pride. "It is not much," he said. "It is everything." Grukka wrapped her arm around his shoulders. "It is ours." They moved in that night, even though the interior was still bare. They spread their bedrolls before the new fireplace and held each other as the flames danced, and Callum thought he had never been happier. The weeks that followed established their new rhythm. They finished the interior of the cabin, built a small barn for the animals they planned to acquire, cleared land for a garden. Grukka proved to have an unexpected talent for growing things, and soon they had neat rows of vegetables sprouting. Callum hunted and trapped, keeping them supplied with meat and furs. In the evenings they talked and loved and planned for the future. They spoke of children, tentatively at first, unsure if such a thing was even possible between their kinds. But the hope was there, fragile and precious. They spoke of growing old together, of seasons turning and years passing in this place they had claimed as their own. "Do you miss it?" Grukka asked one night as they lay in bed. "Your old life? Your people?" Callum considered the question carefully. "I miss some things, the friends I had, the certainty of purpose, but I do not miss the war or the person I was becoming because of it. Here, with you, I am who I want to be." He rolled to face her. "What about you?" "I miss my brother. I miss the stories my grandmother used to tell, but I do not miss the violence or the constant struggle for status within the clan." She traced patterns on his chest. "Here. I am at peace for the first time in my life. That is worth more than all the rest." As autumn approached, they began preparing for winter. They smoked and salted meat, gathered firewood, stored vegetables in the cold cellar Callum had dug. It was satisfying work, the ancient human task of preparing for the lean times, and they threw themselves into it with shared determination. One crisp October morning, as they were hauling in the last of the wood, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Callum and Grukka exchanged a quick glance, then Callum reached for his bow, while Grukka grabbed her axe. They stood together, ready for whatever came. A single rider emerged from the tree line, an older man on a sturdy horse. He pulled up short when he saw them, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Grukka, but he raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," he called. "I'm Henry Whitmore, a surveyor for the territorial government. I'm mapping the settlements in this region." Callum lowered his bow slightly, but did not relax. "This land is claimed. We are homesteading here." "So I see." Henry dismounted and approached slowly. "And doing a fine job of it from what I can see. That is a solid cabin you have built." He looked at Grukka with open curiosity. "I will admit I was not expecting to find anyone out here, least of all a mixed household." "Is that a problem?" Grukka asked, her voice even but her posture tense. "Problem? No. Henry shook his head. "I'm merely recording who is where and what they are doing. For the land office, you understand. If you are working the land and building on it, it is yours by right of homestead. The law is clear on that." "Even for us?" Callum pressed. Henry looked between them, his expression thoughtful. The law does not specify that homesteaders must be human, only that they must be working the land productively. Far as I can see, you are doing that and then some. He pulled out a ledger. If you give me your names and a description of your claim, I will register it officially. No one will be able to dispute your ownership. It seemed too good to be true, but Callum found himself wanting to believe. We are Callum and Grukka Preston. We claim this valley from the creek to the ridgeline, and we intend to farm and ranch here. Preston, Henry wrote in his ledger. Got it, and you will be relieved to know that you are far enough from the border that the war's not much of a concern out here. We get news of it, sure, but the fighting has not reached this far south in decades. You should be safe enough. That's good to hear, Grukka said, visibly relaxing. Henry finished his notes and tucked the ledger away. I will be honest with you folks. You're going to face some prejudice even out here, but you have the law on your side and that counts for something. Build a good life. Be decent neighbors if any others settle nearby, and most people will leave you in peace. That's all we want, Callum said. Peace. Then I wish you luck. Henry mounted his horse and tipped his hat. Welcome to the frontier, Mr. and Mrs. Preston. He rode off, and they stood watching until he disappeared into the trees. Then Grukka turned to Callum, her eyes bright. Mrs. Preston? I suppose we should make that official, Callum said, feeling his heart pound. He took her hands in his. Grukka, we have built a home together, started a life together, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Will you marry me? Properly, with vows and everything? Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course, yes. They married themselves that afternoon, standing by the creek with the mountains as their witnesses. There was no priest, no guests, just the two of them speaking vows they had written themselves. Callum promised to love her across all the differences between them, to stand by her against whatever the world might throw at them, to build a life worthy of her courage and strength. Grukka promised to be his partner in all things, to guard his heart as fiercely as she had once guarded her clan, to love him without reservation for all their days. When they kissed to seal the vows, Callum tasted salt from her tears, and his own eyes were not dry. They had come so far from that moment in the forest, when he had found her wounded and dying. They had chosen each other over and over again, and now they were choosing each other for always. Winter came, and with it the true test of their preparations. The snow fell deep, isolating them completely, and they settled into the close, quiet routine of a frontier winter. There was time for all the things they had been too busy to do. Callum carved furniture, improving their home bit by bit. Grukka wove baskets and mended all their clothes, her clever fingers creating beauty from simple materials. They told each other stories, long, rambling tales of their people's histories and myths. Callum learned the epic of the first chieftain, and Grukka learned the ballad of the 7 kingdoms. They taught each other songs, though neither had a particularly good voice, and laughed at their own off-key attempts. On the longest night of winter, they made love by the firelight and whispered hopes for the spring. A garden that would flourish, animals to tend, perhaps the beginning of a child. It was a fragile hope, that last one, but it lived between them nonetheless. Spring came with a rush of meltwater and new growth. They emerged from their winter cocoon to find the valley transformed, bursting with life. They planted their garden, enlarging it from the previous year, and Callum made a trip to the nearest settlement to trade furs for a pair of goats and a few chickens. The animals gave them fresh milk and eggs, and the cabin began to feel truly like a homestead. One morning in early summer, Grukka woke feeling ill. At first, they worried it was a sickness, but as the days passed and certain other signs appeared, they began to hope for something else entirely. When she finally said the words aloud that she thought she might be pregnant, Callum felt his heart might burst from joy. "Are you certain?" he asked, holding her carefully as if she might break. "Not completely, but everything points to it." She placed her hand over her belly. "I have heard of such things before, humans and orcs producing children, but I never thought it would happen to me." "We are going to be parents," Callum said, marveling at the words. "We are." Grukka's smile was incandescent. "We are going to have a family." The pregnancy progressed through the summer and into the fall. Grukka remained strong and healthy, her body well suited to the demands of carrying a child. Callum fussed over her, much to her amusement, making sure she rested and ate well. They argued playfully about names, about whether the child would look more orc or more human, about what kind of world they were bringing this new life into. "We will teach them to be strong," Grukka said, her hand resting on her swollen belly, "but also kind. They will know both their heritages, and they will be proud of both." "They will know love," Callum added. "Whatever else happens, they will never doubt that they are loved." As Grukka's time drew near, Callum made preparations. He had studied what he could about childbirth, had talked to the midwife in the nearest settlement, and had gathered supplies. He was terrified, but he did not let Grukka see that. She needed his strength now. The baby came in the early hours of a cold November morning. The labor was long and difficult, and Callum stayed by Grukka's side through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. When their daughter finally entered the world, squalling and perfect, he wept openly. She was beautiful, a perfect blend of both of them. Green-tinted skin a shade lighter than her mother's, tiny nubs of tusks just visible, a shock of dark hair, and eyes that were startlingly blue. Callum cut the cord with shaking hands, then placed the baby on Grukka's chest. "Hello, little one," Grukka whispered, her voice rough with exhaustion and wonder. "Hello, my daughter." "What should we name her?" Callum asked, stroking the baby's soft hair. Grukka looked up at him, her eyes full of love. "Hope. We should name her Hope, because that is what she is. Proof that we were right to believe in this, in us." "Hope Preston," Callum said, testing the name. It felt right, solid, and true. Perfect. They spent the first weeks of their daughter's life in a haze of sleeplessness and wonder. Hope was a demanding baby, but every cry, every smile, every small milestone was a miracle. Callum found himself overwhelmed by the depth of his love for this tiny person, this perfect symbol of everything he and Grukka had built together. Grukka recovered quickly, her orcish constitution serving her well. Within a few weeks, she was back to helping with the homestead, though she kept Hope close at all times, nursing and caring for her with a fierce protectiveness that Callum recognized as the same devotion she had once shown her clan. Winter came again, and this time they weathered it as a family. Hope grew, her personality emerging bright and curious. She had Callum's stubbornness and Grukka's strength of will, and already she was proving to be a handful. But they would not have changed a single thing about her. One evening, as they sat by the fire with Hope sleeping between them, Callum looked at his wife and daughter and felt a profound sense of gratitude. He thought back to that day in the forest, to the choice he had made to help rather than harm. It had seemed so small at the time, just one decision among thousands, but it had changed everything. "What are you thinking?" Grukka asked, noticing his expression. "That I am the luckiest man alive. That every choice I made that led me to you was worth it." He leaned over to kiss her. "That I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," she said softly. "You saved my life that day, but you gave me so much more than that. You gave me a future, a family, a home. You gave me everything I thought I had lost." "We saved each other," he corrected, "and we will keep saving each other, every day for the rest of our lives. Promise?" "Promise." As the years passed, their family grew. 2 more children joined Hope, a son they named Caden, and another daughter they named Willow. The homestead prospered, expanding to include fields of grain and a small herd of goats and a flock of chickens. They built additions to the cabin, creating space for their growing family. Other settlers trickled into the region, and while some were suspicious of the mixed family, most came to respect the Prestons. Callum and Grukka were known as hard workers, honest traders, and good neighbors. Their children were accepted by the other settlement children, though not without the occasional incident. But Hope, Caden, and Willow were strong and confident, raised by parents who had taught them to be proud of who they were. On warm summer evenings, the family would gather on the porch Callum had built, and Grukka would tell the old stories of her people while Callum added tales from human lore. The children would listen with rapt attention, understanding that they were inheritors of 2 rich traditions, that they belonged to both worlds and to neither, forging their own path. Sometimes, in the quiet moments after the children were asleep, Callum and Grukka would talk about the past, about how impossible their love had seemed, how many obstacles had stood in their way. But they had overcome them all, choosing each other again and again, building something beautiful and lasting from the ruins of war and prejudice. "Do you ever regret it?" Grukka asked one night, the question she had asked before, but which sometimes still surfaced. "Giving up your old life for this?" And Callum, older now but still as certain as he had been that day in the forest, smiled and pulled her close. "Never. Not for a single moment. You are my life, Grukka. You and our children. Everything else was just prologue." She kissed him then, deep and long and full of all the love they had built over the years. And later, as they lay in their bed listening to the sounds of their sleeping children in the next room, they both knew that they had found something rare and precious. A love that transcended difference, a family that should not have been possible, a home built on hope and courage, and the simple decision to be kind when the world expected cruelty. The war that had defined their early lives ended eventually, peace treaties signed and borders redrawn. Word of it reached their valley, brought by traders and travelers, and Callum and Grukka felt a weight lift from their shoulders. Perhaps the world was changing, becoming a place where their children would face less prejudice, where mixed families would be less remarkable. But even if that proved to be too optimistic, even if the world remained hostile, they had each other, and they had this place they had built together. That would always be enough. Hope grew into a strong, beautiful young woman, inheriting the best of both her parents. Caden became a skilled hunter and tracker, following in his father's footsteps. Willow showed a talent for growing things that surpassed even Grukka's considerable skill. They were good children, and they became good adults, each finding their own path in the world. Some stayed close to home, building their own homesteads in the valley. Others ventured out to see what lay beyond the mountains, but all of them carried with them the lessons their parents had taught them about love and courage and the importance of choosing kindness even when it would be easier to choose fear. Callum and Grukka grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies bearing the marks of a life fully lived. But their love never diminished, never became routine or taken for granted. Every day they chose each other anew, and every night they thanked whatever gods might be listening for the gift they had been given. On a spring morning when they were both in their 60s, Callum woke to find Grukka already up, standing at the window and looking out at the valley. He joined her, slipping his arm around her still strong waist, and followed her gaze. Their grandchildren were playing in the meadow, a mix of human and orc and everything in between, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. The sight filled Callum with a profound sense of completion, of a story well told. "We did it," Grukka said softly, leaning her head against his. "We built something that will outlast us, a family, a legacy." "We did," he agreed, "all because I could not bring myself to leave you dying in the forest that day. All because you saw me as a person, not a monster." She turned to face him, her eyes still as bright and intelligent as they had been that first day. "All because you chose love over hate." "Best choice I ever made." "Mine too." They stood there together, watching their grandchildren play, surrounded by the life they had built together. And Callum thought about the young soldier he had been, lost and weary, hunting an enemy he did not truly want to kill. He thought about the wounded orc woman who had expected death and received mercy instead. And he marveled at the twisting path that had brought them from that moment to this one, from enemies to partners to soulmates. The world had changed around them, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. But this place, this valley, their family, it remained constant. A testament to the power of choosing compassion, of seeing past surface differences to the common humanity beneath. They had started with nothing but each other, two lost souls in a hostile world, and they had built a legacy of love that would echo through generations. As the sun climbed higher and the day unfolded before them, Callum and Grukka remained at the window, content to simply be together. They had faced down prejudice and isolation, had overcome obstacles that should have been insurmountable, had created life and love and hope in a world that had tried to tell them it was impossible. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Their story, which had begun with blood and pain and an unexpected choice, had become a story of healing and growth and enduring love. They had sent him to track the orc down, and he had found her wounded and chose to guard her instead. That choice had changed everything, not just for them, but for all the lives they had touched, all the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. As evening fell and the family gathered for dinner, the cabin full of voices and laughter and love, Callum looked around the table at the faces there. His wife, his children, his grandchildren, all of them proof that love could triumph over hate, that compassion was stronger than fear, that one person's choice to see another as human could ripple outward and change the world. Grukka caught his eye across the table and smiled, that same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago. And Callum smiled back, raising his cup in a silent toast, to choices made and futures built, to love found in unexpected places, to the life they had created together against all odds. They had been given a second chance that day in the forest, both of them. A chance to be more than what the world expected, to write a different story than the one laid out for them. And they had seized that chance with both hands, building something beautiful from the ashes of what might have been. As night fell over the valley and the family eventually dispersed to their own homes and beds, Callum and Grukka retired to their room. They prepared for sleep with the easy familiarity of decades together, moving around each other in a dance they had perfected over the years. When they finally lay down, Grukka curled against Callum's side, her head on his chest, his arms around her. This was how they had slept every night since that first evening in the trapper's cabin, and this was how they would sleep every night until one of them finally passed from this world to the next. "I love you," Callum whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Grukka replied. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for letting me." They drifted off to sleep together, two souls perfectly intertwined, dreaming of the past they had overcome and the future they had secured. The war was a distant memory. The fear and prejudice that had nearly kept them apart faded into insignificance compared to what they had built together. In the morning, they would wake and begin another day in their life together. There would be work to do, grandchildren to spoil, neighbors to visit. The simple, beautiful routine of a life well lived. But for now, they simply held each other, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought them here, to this place of peace and love and perfect belonging. Their story was not one the bards would sing or the historians would record. It was too small, too personal, too much at odds with the grand narratives of war and conquest, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was the greatest triumph either of them had ever known. Because in the end, love was the greatest victory of all. Not the love of grand gestures and dramatic declarations, but the quiet, steady love of two people who woke up every day and chose each other, who built a life together one moment at a time, who saw past every difference to the truth beneath. Callum had been sent to track an orc down, and he had found Grukka wounded and chose to guard her instead. That choice had led to this, to a full and beautiful life, to a family that spanned the divide between their peoples, to a love that had endured every test. And as they slept, wrapped in each other's arms in the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their love in every corner, they were content. More than content. They were happy, fulfilled, and deeply grateful for every moment they had been given. This was their happily ever after, earned through courage and compassion and an unwavering commitment to each other. It was not perfect, but it was real. And it was more than either of them had ever dared to hope for in that dark moment in the forest when their paths had first crossed. They had found each other against all odds, and they had built something that would last long after they were gone. A legacy of love that their children and grandchildren would carry forward, spreading the message that different did not mean enemy, that understanding was possible even across the deepest divides, that love could bloom in the most unlikely places. And so their story ended, where the best stories always end, not with a grand finale, but with a quiet moment of perfect contentment. Two people who had found each other, saved each other, and loved each other through everything the world could throw at them. Two people who had proven that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is choose kindness when cruelty would be easier, choose love when hate would be simpler, choose to see the person rather than the enemy. Callum and Grukka Preston, human and orc, husband and wife, parents and grandparents, had lived a life worth living. They had faced their challenges, overcome their obstacles, and emerged victorious not through violence, but through love. And in doing so, they had changed their small corner of the world forever, proving that a better future was possible if people were willing to take that first brave step toward understanding. Their grandchildren would tell their children about the remarkable couple who had loved across the divide, who had built a family that should not have been possible, who had shown that peace could begin with just two people willing to see each other truly. And those stories would inspire others to make similar choices, to reach across divides, to choose love over fear. But that was the future. In this moment, in this quiet night, Callum and Grukka simply slept, content in the knowledge that they had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. They had their happy ending, hard-won and precious, and they would cherish every remaining day of it together. The stars wheeled overhead, the seasons would continue their eternal dance, and life would go on. But in this valley, in this home, love had triumphed. And that triumph, small as it might seem in the grand scheme of things, was everything that mattered.